at the end of the day, if you read a great book and you choose not to take any action on it, from my perspective, that's closer to a form of entertainment than it is education or behavior change. And so people who read 100 books a year, but they don't take any action on them, it's not improving their lives very much.
This is Find Joy with Joyan Season 2, where joy gets stronger, our community gets bigger, and together we become better versions of ourselves in a world full of limitless possibilities. I'm your host, Joyan Chan. And every Wednesday, we bring you inspiring stories that will light up your soul, powerful message that will make you go wow, and fun conversations that will crack you up with me and my special guests and friends. And it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. If you are new here, this podcast is for you if you are looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. We dive deep into mindset mastery, spirituality, love and relationship matters, and how to manifest more success and abundance in all aspects of your life, however that looks. This podcast has got your back every step of the way. Now, without further ado, get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. So joining us today, our guest stands as the visionary force behind Book Thinkers, a growing seven-figure marketing agency that seamlessly bridges the worlds of authors and readers. In just over 7 years, he has organically built a platform that reaches over 1 million people each month. And his podcast, also a global top 2% show that features world-class authors such as Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, and Alex Hormozi, has helped hundreds of authors expand their reach to hundreds of millions of readers and drive significant revenue growth as part of their book campaigns. And now has dedicated his life to helping millions of readers take action on the information they learn and rise to their potential through his books, speaking, and personal brand as a whole. So guys, help me welcoming the author of the book, Rise of the Reader, Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learned, Nick Hutchison. Nick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Joy, can I ask you the first question today?
I kind of knew. I see this coming. Yeah, sure.
So we're recording this at the beginning of January. So we just wrapped up 2023. So what was the best book that you read in 2023? What comes to mind?
Wow. I knew you were going to ask this question, but I didn't prepare for that answer. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, to be honest, and see my favorite book would be actually this. Okay, let me just grab that. It would be The Mountain Is You. Right, I'm not sure if you have read this book, but
No, I haven't read it yet, but I've seen a lot of people talking about it over the last year.
yeah, I would say this is my favorite book. And actually, it's crazy story. I'm supposed to be the guest here, but long story short, so I went to aerospace camp. So it was a 14-day trekking to aerospace camp, and I brought this book with me because I want to remind myself that what I'm conquering is not the mountain, but it's me myself. So basically, yeah, this is my favorite book.
Well, thank you for satisfying my curiosity. Like I'm a big fan of books, and so that's always how I like to start conversations, so I get to know who I'm talking to a little bit more,
Right. And how much can you tell from a person? Like, just based on the question that you asked me, like, what can you tell from a person based on what books she or he read?
I think you could tell a lot. I think the books that somebody is reading is a great window into their soul, right? Not to be cheesy about it, but you picked a book, The Mountain Is You, which I haven't read yet, but what you just described was a 14-day trek where you realized, you're not conquering the mountain, you're conquering yourself. And that's inner work. It shows me that you're capable of achieving more, and you're overcoming resistance, you're building discipline, you're finding joy in the process. And joy is finding joy in the process. And I think that what that does for me is it shows me that we're very similar. We want more out of life. We're trying to go out there and fulfill our potential. and we're educating ourselves. And so I think those are all amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What you just said is exactly who I am and what I am inspired to do in life, right? So what is your favorite book then?
Well, I'll tell your audience that over the last 10 years or so, I've read about 500 different books. Most of them are in the personal development, self-help, business kind of genres. And I've had different steps along the way that are very meaningful. So I probably have like a top 25 out of the 500, right? A top 5%. But the one that I love to talk about, I think that the original book that inspired me to take action was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Mm-hmm.
And that book was so transformational for me because there I was in my early 20s. I was financially illiterate, even though I was going to business school. And so anytime I was in school and conversations about money got brought up or investing, it was too complex. I didn't understand it. And so I'd shy away from those conversations. But then I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and Robert Kiyosaki, the author, introduces us to a bunch of different concepts about cash flow and assets versus liabilities, investments, how starting a business means you can use pre-tax money for your expenses, and all different things that I was previously unaware of. And so that was the book that kind of started off my journey. And so as a result, I suppose every other book I read after that, I have to give credit to Robert Kiyosaki for starting that momentum,
Wow. Yeah, I totally get what you mean because I read this book as well when I was pretty young and I didn't know I didn't have a financial background or I didn't understand numbers at all, right? I wasn't an entrepreneur back then, but I read the book and that opened up my eyes and my mind to what is possible. I don't have to just stuck at the job that I'm not passionate about. There are like four other quadrants, right, that we can explore and we can possibly do in our life. So yeah, I love that book. Other than that, I think for most people it's gonna be Think and Grow Rich, right? Yeah, I mean the classic for sure. So so when did you start reading personal development book?
I've only been reading them for about 10 years. I just turned 30 2 weeks ago, so I started reading them when I was about 20 years old.
Wow. And you kept going, you kept reading. So how many books did you read did you set yourself like set a goal like this year, every year I'm gonna read like 10 books or every month or every week? Did you have a goal for reading?
When I was first starting out, I definitely built goals. I was optimizing for a certain number of books per year. But over the last few years, I realized that that's not the right metric to track, right? At the end of the day, if you read a great book and you choose not to take any action on it, from my perspective, that's closer to a form of entertainment than it is education or behavior change. And so people who read 100 books a year, but they don't take any action on them, it's not improving their lives very much. And so a few years ago, I stopped tracking the number of books I was reading per year. And I started to track for what was I taking action on. You just mentioned another great book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. There's a quote from Napoleon Hill that I love. It says, "Action is the real measure of intelligence." Action. And so it's not reading a book that changes your life. It's taking action on the book after you read it that changes your life, right? So great question. Listen, I've read 500 individual books over the last 10 years. So I've probably read an average of 50 books a year. But reading isn't my goal. Taking action is my goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Of course. So what kind of action would you take? Like how do you know is the right action to take from reading a book?
It's a great question. And I think it all starts with preparing for the books that we're reading. So I will mention for your audience that I cover what I'm about to say in so much more detail in my book, Rise of the Reader, but I'll give everybody an example, that's kind of easy to digest here. So I think about personal development and business and nonfiction books as problem solvers, right? Because somebody out there in the universe condensed decades of their lived experience and greatest life lessons and solutions to problems into days by writing a book about it. So for me, it's the greatest way to figure out how to solve a problem. As human beings, we think we're unique, but the fact is about 100 billion people have lived on this planet, and millions of them have lived amazing lives. They've been healthy, wealthy, happy, great relationships. And they've documented how they got there in these books. The roadmap is available for $20 in a few hours of your time. And so again, books solve problems. So here's how I think about it. When I sit down to read a great book, I read the front cover, the back cover. I'm reading this book to solve a very specific problem. And then what I'll do before I start reading it, once I get a good idea of what I could expect to learn, I'll set a SMART goal. So SMART is an acronym that stands for specific. Your goal needs to be specific. Measurable, you need to know whether or not you've achieved your goal. It needs to be measurable. Attainable is the A, which means you need to set a realistic goal, something that you actually can see yourself achieving. R stands for, there's a few different ways that I kind of think about this. It's written, it's realistic. There are a bunch of different ways that you can think about this. I like to think about it as like relatable, like emotionally connected to the goal, relevant to your life, solving a problem that you're currently facing. And then T stands for time bound. You want to set a deadline for taking action. So if I was going to read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill again, I would set a SMART goal, something like find and implement at least 2 ways to improve my finances by the end of February. And I would write that goal on the inside cover of the book. And I would review it every time I read another chapter. Find and implement at least 2 strategies for improving my financial situation by the end of February. So now you're telling your brain what to filter for. You're giving, your goal is being shared with the book, and then the book can share that information back with you. And so by the time you're done reading, maybe you have 10, 15, 20 different things that you could implement. But remember, your goal is only to implement 2. So what I recommend doing after you're done reading the book is writing down all those potential things that you could implement, and then thinking what 20% of these are going to create 80% of the change that I'm looking to make. What 2 of these are going to help me solve that problem that I set out to solve at the beginning of this reading experience? And then just choose to implement a couple things. That's at least how I think about it.
That is a great tip. I've not heard something like that, like write down the goal inside the cover of the book. Like I would not, this is not something that I would do, right? If not, that I just learn from you. So I'm gonna start doing that. But here's another problem, right? Yeah, I'm gonna start doing that, right? So yeah, here's the thing. How I approach podcasting is for every guest that I talk to, I'm learning so much from them, right? But what is one action that I can take from the podcast, from learning from my guests? So that is how I approach podcasting. I believe the same for book as well. So the other problem that of course we all know is people buying books but not reading it. I'm personally guilty because I bought all the books and there are a lot of them that I still have not read. So how would you help people? Like, what is the number one habit that we need to develop to start reading books so that we can implement whatever that, the things that we learn from the book?
Yes. So here's how I love to start out with people that tell me they don't have time to read. So first I ask the following question. Joy, if I paid you $10,000 to read 1 book by the end of next month, would you take that deal?
Yes.
And you'd be like, yes. So, okay, now we're in agreement that it's not a matter of whether or not you can read the book. You can read it, but it's a question of whether or not you value reading enough to prioritize it over the other things that you're currently focused on. And so I love to ask that question because it kind of disarms people. It's like, okay, you're right. I could find time to read, but I'm choosing not to, which is okay. There are a lot of things grabbing for our attention these days.
Yeah.
Then I love to recommend the following strategy. I love to say, instead of trying to find time, let's replace 15 minutes of social media scrolling in the morning and the first 15 minutes of your Netflix or whatever you're watching in the evening. So that's 30 minutes a day. We're not finding 30 minutes. We're just replacing a low impact activity like scrolling on social media in the morning or watching Netflix or sports or something in the evening with reading a great book. And in 30 minutes a day, the average reader will probably read about 20 pages. 20 pages, 5 days a week is 100 pages a week. Most of these books are only 200 pages. So that's a book every 2 weeks, just by replacing a little bit of social media, not the whole thing, and a little bit of Netflix, not the whole thing. Like, I'm not a robot. I still watch TV, but I replace a little bit of that with reading a great book. And then what happens over time is you start to develop consistency. You know, every time you go to pick up the book, it's a little bit easier. And eventually you'll start to enjoy it, because if you're setting SMART goals and you're taking action and you're solving problems and you're building skills and your life is improving, you'll get hooked, just like I did.
Okay, here is another question. So, would you recommend people to, okay, once we finish a book, we immediately start reading another book, or only until we have implemented what we learned from the book and taken action, then we start learning something else? What is the
I
best?
recommend I recommend continuing to read. So reading is a separate habit than implementation. They're different activities. You know, sometimes people try to do both at the same time in the same block of time on their calendar, but I consider that multitasking. Reading a book, a physical paper book, is a pretty passive activity where you have a pen and a highlighter and you're sitting down and it's easy. But implementing a book can take all different forms. You know, you can read books on health and fitness and finance and business and mindset and breath work and all sorts of things, right? So implementing those books is too variable. It's not consistent enough. So I say keep that reading time in your calendar and use the rest of your time at work, you know, with your family, at the gym, to implement the books that you're reading. So don't lose the consistency of the reading. Just implement in your free time outside of reading.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've got so many questions for you, right, in terms of reading and but I want to talk about your business as well, because you have built an incredible marketing agency, which is Book Thinkers. So tell us, what exactly is Book Thinkers, and what inspired to start this business?
Well, here's the origin story, and then I'll kind of explain what we do today as part of the story. So when I was in my senior year of college or university, whatever you want to call it, I had just read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Right.
And one of the concepts in that book that I really enjoyed was the idea of a mastermind.
Yep.
A mastermind is a group of people focused on solving one problem. And it almost creates like this external energy. Like there's this momentum in the room. It's not tangible, but you know it's there, and it feels really good and it helps you solve problems. And so my friend Alec and I, Alec Clement, we were meeting on weekends and we were masterminding. We wanted to start a business. We didn't really know what, but we got in the room and we just talked about it. And one of the things that we read was that businesses solve problems. So every time we encountered a problem, it didn't matter how small it was, we would write it down. And on the weekends, we would talk about it. And one of the problems I wrote down was that I had a hard time retaining the information from the books I was reading, because I was reading so many books and I was continuing to read and read and read. And I didn't really know much about implementation yet or how to take great notes. So I was forgetting what I was reading. And so the original inspiration for Book Thinkers is very different than what it is today. The original inspiration was a website where we could put our book notes and go back and visit them. And if somebody asked, hey, what were your favorite takeaways from Rich Dad Poor Dad, I could send them to the website and they could check out my favorite takeaways. Now, right after that, we decided, let's blow this thing up. Let's build a mobile application where other people can put their biggest takeaways too. Spoiler alert, long story short, that never happened. So we spent a bunch of money, we spent a bunch of hours, we worked on it for a long time. It never really worked. But what did happen was I started to post the books I was reading on social media in anticipation of the app coming out, because I wanted an audience to sell it into. So I was just sharing book reviews and things like that. The app kind of died, but right around that same time, authors started to reach out to me and they'd say, hey, Nick, I love your book reviews. Can I pay you to review my book? And I thought, well, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before, right? That wasn't a monetization strategy that I was thinking. So I was working a full-time job during the day. And then in the evenings, I was reading these personal development books. I was doing paid book reviews. And, you know, when you read business books, you learn to follow up with customers. If there's an inbound demand for something, there's probably other people out there that if I reached out to them and I said, hey, we offer this service, maybe they would want it too. And then I would try all different services, really trying to get to know my customers and say, what problems are they facing? Why do they want to sell their book so bad? And why is it so hard to sell a book? And over the years, I tried out all types of things that didn't work. I found a few things that did work. And now the agency, we've got 10 people on our team between full-time and part-time people. We're working with hundreds of authors a year. And there's really 3 core services that we provide. And I'll be brief. One is short form video production, where we fly out to an author with the cameras and the lighting, and we help them build 50 or 100 pieces of video content related to their book. Number 2, podcast booking. So we'll place authors on great podcasts to talk about their books, and we can supply great podcasters with authors who know their stuff. They're subject matter experts. They're amazing at what they do, and they can provide value to a podcaster's audience. And then number 3, we have a big audience. We have hundreds of thousands of followers across our social media platforms. And so we still get paid to talk about those books and interview those authors and help them sell. So that's kind of the story of how my business was built and what we do today.
That is pretty awesome, and you make it sound like so easy. The idea, we executed it, and then boom, here is what we are today. So, but of course, there are a lot of struggles, right? So, what was your biggest failure? Because we would like to think that we all know that success is not an overnight thing. But what was your biggest failure, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I'll give 2 examples because I already touched on one of them.
Right.
When I tried to build that mobile application with my friend Alec, and we also had another friend, Derek, who was trying to help out with it, we literally spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of our time on that project. And as a recent college student with no money, right, that was a lot of money for all of us. And we put our, blood, sweat, and tears into that thing, and it didn't work. And we tried to keep it alive. And eventually the company that we were outsourcing the development to, they went out of business.
Right.
And they just left us with this broken web application that was like kind of turned into a mobile application. And we actually had hundreds of organic users on the platform logging their books, and it was all going to go away. And so we had to tell, and we couldn't export the information, and it was a whole issue. I mean, we lost money, we lost time, we probably hurt some relationships with people out there who were using the platform. And yeah, that was a mess. And that took place over a couple of years, right? We spent probably like a year and a half on that project. So that was a big loss. And I will say that I've come to think about failure in a different way, in a healthier way. When I was younger, in the US traditional public education system, you're taught to avoid failure.
Yeah.
You're taught that failure is a bad thing. You'll get penalized if you don't think the same way as your teachers. And, if you fail in a class, then you're a failure in real life. But what happens in business is different. When you fail, you learn. Like, you are the person that's learning. And so next time you're faced with a challenge, something that didn't work last time, which means you have a better chance of figuring it out this time. And when you expect failure as part of the process, it doesn't surprise you. The road to success and failure are not different roads, right? They're the same road. It's just the successful people navigated a few more obstacles and overcame a few more difficulties before they got there. It's that idea you're always 3 feet from gold. It's like, just keep going a little bit farther. The other failure, I'll give a more recent one. With my agency, we hosted our first event last year. So it was an in-person event in the US for authors and podcasters to come and network and learn about book marketing and marketing in general. And I spent a lot of money renting the space, getting it set up, flying out my whole team, building out, paying for some speakers to come. And we lost a lot of money doing that. So it was my first experience hosting an event. Now, the event itself was a success because, again, I've reframed failure. I learned a heck of a lot of things that I shouldn't do next time. And I learned a bunch of things that I should do next time, right? So you're never going to know until you try. And I'll wrap up this whole tangent by saying something that I learned from Robert Kiyosaki. In that original book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he says somewhere in the back of the book, he says something like, I've met a whole lot of poor people that have never lost money investing. But I've met a lot of rich people and they've all lost a lot of money investing. And so the point is, if you don't step up to the plate and play the game, you can't hit a home run. And so if you stay safe and you don't risk it, you don't learn. And that's what I've learned about failure.
That is beautiful. Yeah, I'm so glad I asked the question. And thank you so much for being so real and vulnerable and sharing your recent failure as well about running your live events. We all know that for people who know you, know that you actually have interviewed people like Grant Cardone, Alex Hormozi. So these people, they are like, you know, top notch. How did you even manage to get these influencer figures or notable top notch, I would say, authors on your show, or to connect with them?
Oh, I love this question, because now this becomes more useful for you in particular. I have so many things to say on this subject. And so if there are any podcasters in the audience, amazing. If there are any business owners in the audience, think about how you can leverage powerful personalities for your business, right? There's always a lens that this becomes applicable. So here's the first thing that I'll say. These people are not as hard to reach as you think they are. And here's the analogy. This is the analogy that I've heard used. So it's not mine, but it kind of makes sense. Hear me out. The hot girl at the bar, right? Every guy at the bar anticipates rejection. They think she's going to say no when they walk over and try to talk to her. So nobody tries. And at the end of the night, she walks out. Nobody walked up to her. She feels insecure, right? The same thing happens with social media influencers. Everybody anticipates rejection. Podcasters, business owners, followers, nobody reaches out as a result. And here's the proof. When my following was like 20,000 on Instagram, I literally used to get 50 DMs every day from people in my community asking questions about book recommendations or how to take great notes or implement what they're reading. And as my audience got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, less and less and less and less people reached out. Today, we have 160,000 followers on Instagram, right? So it's 8 times bigger than it was back then. We get 3-4 DMs per day. Why is that? It's because people don't think I'm going to respond. They think that because I have 100,000 followers, I must be getting 1,000 DMs a day, but that's not the case. It's the exact opposite. And so that's my advice for hard to reach people. Remember that everybody anticipates rejection, and as a result, far less people are reaching out than you think. So that's kind of lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is that value does not need to be exchanged in the same currency. And so when I'm working with somebody like Grant Cardone charges $100,000 an hour for his time. It's a lot of money. I don't have $100,000 to pay Grant Cardone. What I do have is an audience of people who would love to read his books and sign up for his programs. And so how do I communicate the value to him? It's not, hey, Grant, come on my show because I want to interview you. It's, hey, Grant, come on my show because I have a big audience of people who would love to learn from you. And they're probably ready to buy some of your stuff too, because we haven't had anybody come on and pitch sales training or talk about the same things you do. And by the way, Grant, you're 60 something. My audience is full of 18 to 30-year-olds. It's probably a young demographic that you're not currently reaching. Happy to have you talk about whatever you want, right? And so I'm trying to communicate value to him where he can come in and shine and sell, and that's what he wants. Russell Brunson, who owns ClickFunnels, he told me that he charges $250,000 an hour for virtual keynotes.
Wow. Okay.
But he comes on the podcast for free. Why? Because he wants to sell books. And I have a very unique audience that loves to buy books. So figure out, everybody that's out there, figure out who are the most influential people in your space and how can you incentivize them to work with you? What do they want? And how can you articulate to their wants and desires? The last thing that I'll say here is that we should all be doing this, because trust is transitive. What I mean by that is if you trust Grant Cardone or Alex Hormozi, and I can show that they trust me by interviewing them on my podcast and seeing them in person and stuff, then the transitive property states that you'll also trust me. And that you can borrow the credibility of people who have spent millions of dollars and dozens of years building their brand simply by interviewing them on your podcast. You can borrow their credibility, use it to build your own brand faster. So those are, you know, I have tons of other things to say on this subject, but those are some of the, I think, the things that will probably resonate the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about for people who are just starting out and they might not have a huge audience or following like you already have when you reach out to these people, right? Maybe they have a couple of hundred people following them on social media. They have a podcast and they are trying to have their dream guest on their show. How do they go about reaching out to these people and getting a yes? Is it even possible?
Yeah, definitely possible. Number one is I highly recommend reading or listening to a book called The Third Door by Alex Banayan.
Okay.
So here's the metaphor. Every nightclub has 3 ways to get in. And this is kind of how he kicks off the book. Door
Right.
number 1 is general admission. That's just sending a DM to somebody on Instagram, or, you know, that's just emailing them, you know, through their contact form on their website. It's general admission. Everybody uses that door. And so as a result, you have to stand in line, you have to wait in the cold, you have to pay a cover. Maybe they don't even let you in.
Yeah.
Door number 2 is the VIP entrance. You already have to be famous. You have to have a ton of money. You can buy your way in. Most of us, like you said, we're just starting out. We have a small following. We can't use the VIP entrance. And I'll talk in a minute about how to become a VIP in a second, but you can't use the VIP entrance. But here's the secret. Every nightclub has a third door. And in the case of an actual nightclub, that might mean like sneaking in the kitchen, army crawling through the back, popping into the back of the nightclub, like, oh, I'm in. You know, that's the thing, though. You're still in because you're in the nightclub. It has a third door. You just got to get creative. And so this book, The Third Door by Alex Banayan, he talks about how he drops out of college. He's nobody. And he works his way all the way up to Bill Gates. And he gets to interview Bill Gates and Lady Gaga and a whole bunch of other people. So everybody has a third door. You just got to get really creative about finding it. And then the second thing that I'll say is Evan Carmichael, one of my mentors, he taught me a really important thing, which is like a social media snowball. And here's what I mean by that. Evan Carmichael was the first interview on my podcast. And Evan said to me at the end, he goes, use my name. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, when you reach out to somebody and they follow me, you can see that they follow me, use my name. Say, hey, I just interviewed Evan and I'd love to have you on the show as well. And if that person trusts Evan, then they'll bypass due diligence. They don't care how many followers you have. They don't care how many downloads you get per episode because their friend was on your show. So they bypass due diligence. And you can snowball that. Okay, so now I had Evan. I'm going to use Evan to go get Russell. Now I had Russell. I'm going to use Russell to go get Grant. Now I have Grant. I'm going to use Grant to go get Alex. That type of thing. And you could just snowball this momentum. Pretty soon when you reach out to one of your favorite influencers, you're like, hey, I just had A, B, C, D, E, F, and G on my podcast. They're all that person's friends. Why would they say no? There's a fear of missing out that happens, you know?
Wow, thanks for sharing that strategy. I think, yeah, now hearing that, I think the most difficult part is getting the first yes, right? Getting the first person to say yes to you. So now that you have, you know, spoken to so many people, you have interviewed all these people on your show, what is really the next level for you? Like what else do you want to do and achieve in your life? Seems like you have already achieved all the success you want for your business, even for your personal growth. And I saw your Instagram recently, you gotten married as well. So congratulations. So it seems like
Thank
you
you.
have achieved all the success in life on social media, right? But what is really the next level for you?
It should happen if you put in all the work, right? Which is you achieve a place that you actually love. And it, when you think about the future, you don't think about anything different than your present moment. And the reason that I'll say this is because it's what we're all aiming for, right? We're all aiming for a place where we love the present moment, where we're happy, we're not worried about money, we're in a great relationship, we have freedom of time, and that is possible. Like when I was starting my journey 10 years ago, this is exactly what I wanted. And everybody that I was reading, like in these books, they were telling me it was possible, but none of my friends and family were thinking about it that way. And I'll tell you what, like it is possible. You can be happy, healthy and wealthy all at the same time. You can have great relationships, you can love what you do. And so when I think, if you were to ask me about this same question like 2 or 3 years ago, I would have told you this huge vision with like all these crazy things happening. And now I say, I just want a little more of the same. Like, I genuinely enjoy the passage of time. I love my business. I love my gym routine, my biohacking, optimizing for energy. I love my relationships. I love my freedom to travel. We're traveling all over the world and having fun. And, soon we're going to start a family. And like, it's not super different than my current reality. It's just, I want to continue to push myself because progress is part of my purpose, and it fulfills me when I grow my business and when I achieve new things in the gym, or, when we have a breakthrough in our relationship. Those things are still happening. But yeah, I enjoy my time, and that I think is the goal for all of us.
Yeah, beautiful. So back to books, right? So what is your current reading routine? Do you have a routine for reading? And if you could share that with us.
Yes, I try to schedule 10 hours of reading into my calendar every week. 10 hours. So that depending on the week, it looks a little bit different, because I think that for me, generating revenue for the business and focusing on some of the other things I have take precedence over reading at this point, unless I'm being paid to read something for a podcast or a book review. So I try to fit 10 hours of reading into my schedule every week. And that might mean 2 hours, 5 days a week. That might mean, couple of 2 long 5-hour reading sessions on the weekend. Sometimes I don't read much during the week, but it changes. I still think that reading is probably the most valuable thing that I can spend my time on. It just moves itself around in the priority list.
And do you actually schedule it, like put in your calendar or set a reminder? Wow, okay, yeah.
I live out of my calendar. So when I sit down on Monday and I get ready for the week, I have a bunch of podcasts, I have a bunch of sales calls, I have a bunch of networking meetings, sometimes I'm traveling, and then I'll try to actually schedule my time in there around all of that chaos.
Right, yeah, awesome. All right, I know you don't have much time left, I mean, for this interview. So thank you so much for coming to our show today, and you have been very generous and kind with your sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your life experiences, your entrepreneurship journey with all of us. Thank you so much. But we always end with our final 5 rapid fire questions. So these are 5 questions that I ask all my guests at the end of the show, and every question has to be answered in 1 word or 1 sentence maximum.
Hit me.
The first question is, what is one thing you wish you knew earlier?
Patience.
I love it. Second question, if you could live your life all over again, what would you do differently?
Read more books.
Wow, more books. Okay.
Earlier, I didn't start reading until I was 20. I wish I started earlier than that.
Right, yeah. Okay, the third question is, and this question is only for you. What is the book that you are reading right now?
The Daily Pressfield by Stephen Pressfield. It's all about overcoming resistance. It's a really good one.
Love that. The next question is, if you have 5 minutes and the whole world is listening to you, what would you say?
Action is the real measure of intelligence, Napoleon Hill.
Less than 5 minutes, but yeah. The last question is, what brings you the greatest joy?
What brings me the greatest joy? There are a number of variables that create joy for me. I think one of the biggest ones is family. Family first. It's a big piece of my life. Another one is progress. So making progress in my health, my wealth, my happiness, that creates fulfillment. Another one is impact. So when I can help other people make progress in their health, their wealth, their happiness, or relationships, that brings me joy. When I can be in the present moment, so presence, meditation, mindfulness, journaling, reading, that brings me joy. So those are some of the things that bring me joy.
Yeah, beautiful. And I just realized that I forgotten to ask you one of the most important questions that I wanted to ask you today. So As someone who has worked closely with numerous authors, right, what would be your number one piece of advice for aspiring authors to start writing their book?
Make your book as actionable as humanly possible, because it's really hard to sell books. And I think the most efficient way to sell a great book is to provide a lot of value and make that value actionable so that people can go out there and implement what they've learned. And then as they change their behavior, they start to talk about your book. Oh, Rich Dad, Poor Dad got me to read all these other books. Now I'm talking about it. The 4-Hour Work Week got me out of my desk job and helped me build a remote business. Now I'm talking about it, right? So I took action as a result of reading those books, and now I talk about them. And I think that far too often, authors make it really difficult for the reader to know what to implement or what to take action on. And I think that the easier you can make that job for them, the better.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I asked that question. That I remember to ask that question because I am one aspiring, author. I do want to write my book one day. So yeah, thank you so much again for coming to our show. Now tell my listeners where they can, where is the best place to get a hold of you and connect with you.
Our most vibrant community is on Instagram at Book Thinkers. And that's where I recommend everybody goes. From there are links in our bio to my book, to our website, to a bunch of other stuff. And if anybody wants a custom book recommendation from me, because you've heard the conversation today and you're like, you know what, I think I should read more. I definitely recommend reading Rise of the Reader by Nick Hutchison. But tell me a problem you're facing or a skill set that you want to develop, and I will provide a custom book recommendation to you.
Wow, I love that. All right, guys, I know you love this episode. If not, you wouldn't be listening till the very end. So go follow Nick, go to his website, get his book. I put all his link in the show note below. So make sure you go and check it out. And thank him for coming to our show today and for all his amazing insights and sharing. Follow me on Instagram at Joyan.Chan if you haven't already, and also make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss another episode coming to you every Wednesday. And I will always leave you the same way as I leave you every other episode. Show up. The world needs you and you need you. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead.
Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag FindJoyJoyan_podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.